It was a quiet afternoon when I called a man to my house. I had recently bought a new music system, but I didn't know how to set it up properly. Someone had recommended a local technician, so I decided to call him for help. When he arrived, he greeted me politely and took off his shoes before stepping inside. His calm and respectful nature instantly gave me a sense of comfort. He didn't talk much at first, just quietly examined the wires and buttons while I watched from a distance. As he worked, he asked small questions about where I wanted to place the speakers and how loud I usually listened to music. His voice was soft, his tone humble. Slowly, our conversation began to flow naturally. He told me how much he loved music and how it had helped him through difficult times. I listened with interest, feeling a connection to his words. It had been a long time since I had talked to someone with such calm energy. While he worked, the sound of his tools mixed with the faint noise from outside. The house felt alive again. For months after my breakup, everything had felt silent and heavy. But now, for some reason, I didn't mind the company. He asked for a glass of water, and when I handed it to him, he smiled, a small, genuine smile that stayed in my mind even after he looked away. He explained how the sound system worked and offered to test it before leaving. When he turned it on, the room filled with soft instrumental music. It wasn't loud, just enough to make the air around us feel lighter. I watched him checking the sound balance carefully, adjusting it until it was perfect. There was something peaceful about the way he focused on his work. We started talking again, this time about ordinary things, weather, work, and daily life. But somehow, those simple words felt meaningful. I realized that sometimes, peace doesn't come from big moments but from the quiet presence of someone kind. When he finished his work, I thanked him. He smiled again and said, "If you ever need help again, just call. I don't live far." As he left, the soft music still played in the background. I sat down near the window, listening to it, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, calmness. I didn't know why, but his short visit left a warm feeling inside me. Maybe, after all the heartbreak, life was giving me a small reminder that kindness still exists. A few days later, I called him again. The sound system was working fine, but one of the speakers wasn't balancing properly. When I called, he picked up immediately and said he would come by in the evening. I didn't know why, but I was happy to hear his voice. It wasn't about the speaker anymore, it was the way he spoke, calm and sincere, that made me feel comfortable. He arrived right on time, just like before. This time, he seemed a little more relaxed, smiling as he entered. I offered him tea before he began working, and he accepted politely. We sat for a moment before he got to work, and our small talk began again, about the weather, his work, and how music can change a person's mood. The conversation felt easy, natural, and somehow familiar. As he worked on the speaker, he shared a bit about his life. He told me how he once dreamed of opening his own music shop but couldn't because of financial struggles. There was something honest about his tone that made me want to listen more. I found myself asking questions, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to know more about him. His words carried simplicity, and that simplicity felt rare. When he finished adjusting the speaker, he played a soft romantic song to test the sound. The melody filled the room gently, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. We just listened. The rain had started outside, light and rhythmic, blending perfectly with the song. It was one of those moments that didn't need words, it just felt peaceful. He turned to me and said softly, "Music connects people, even strangers." I smiled, agreeing quietly. There was no reason to deny it. Somehow, in those moments, I felt connected too. We talked for a little longer, about loyalty, trust, and how difficult it is to find honest people these days. His eyes held sincerity, and though I didn't know much about him, I felt I could believe his words. Before leaving, he said, "If anything ever stops working, call me, even if it's something small." I nodded and thanked him again. As he stepped out, I watched the raindrops tracing paths on the window glass. The soft music was still playing, and I couldn't help but think about his words. I didn't know if it was friendship or just comfort, but his presence had brought a strange calm into my quiet home. That night, I sat near the window again, listening to the same song he played, and I realized that sometimes, trust begins quietly, not with promises, but with simple kindness. A week passed before I saw him again. I had no reason to call this time, yet something inside me wanted to. I told myself it was because I needed to check if everything with the sound system was still fine, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. When I called, he sounded surprised but happy. He said he could stop by the next day after work, and for some reason, I found myself looking forward to it. The next evening, he arrived with the same polite smile. He carried a small bag of tools even though there was nothing really wrong to fix. I told him everything was working perfectly, but he said, "It's always good to double check." His voice had that same calmness that made the air feel lighter. I made tea again, and we sat near the window, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the clouds. Our conversation turned deeper than before. He talked about how people change over time, how trust is something that's easy to give but hard to protect. I listened quietly, wondering if he spoke from experience. There was a sadness in his eyes, something hidden that he didn't want to say out loud. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I just listened. After a while, I noticed he was unusually quiet. I asked if something was wrong. He looked at me for a moment and said, "Sometimes people pretend to care, only to see how much you'll trust them. It's a strange world." His words struck something in me, maybe because I had lived through a similar betrayal before. I didn't know if he was warning me or just speaking generally, but his tone carried weight. When he got up to check the sound system again, I noticed something different. He seemed distracted, like his mind was elsewhere. I brushed the thought away, convincing myself I was imagining things. But later that evening, after he left, I felt a strange emptiness. It was as if something important had been taken from the room, not an object, but a feeling. The next morning, when I went to play some music, one of the small accessories that came with the system was missing. It wasn't valuable, but it felt odd. I searched everywhere and finally decided to call him, just to ask if he might have packed it by mistake. The phone rang several times, but he didn't answer. I tried again the next day, still no reply. Days turned into weeks, and he never came back. No message, no call. I sat by the same window where we used to talk, wondering what went wrong. Maybe he was just busy, I told myself. But deep down, I knew the truth, something about his last visit hadn't felt right. The trust I thought I had rebuilt was suddenly fragile again. That evening, I played the same song he had once tested. The melody was still beautiful, but it no longer brought peace. It only reminded me how quickly people can enter your life, change everything, and then leave without a word. I stared out at the rain, realizing that maybe this time, the test wasn't for the sound system, it was for my heart. Days passed, then weeks. The silence in my home felt heavier than before, but I slowly learned to live with it. At first, I kept expecting him to call or at least send a message explaining why he disappeared so suddenly. But that message never came. The unanswered questions stayed in my heart for a while, but one morning I decided not to wait for answers anymore. I made myself a cup of tea, turned on the same music system, and told myself that life must go on. The music played softly in the background, and I began to remember everything, not with pain, but with understanding. Maybe he didn't come into my life to stay, maybe he came to remind me what trust feels like, even if only for a short time. Betrayal doesn't always break you, sometimes, it teaches you how strong you can be when you stand alone. I started spending more time doing things I loved, reading, writing, and taking care of my small garden. Slowly, the quiet moments that once felt empty began to feel peaceful again. I realized that my happiness didn't have to depend on anyone's presence or promises. The peace I was looking for was always inside me, I had just forgotten how to find it. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found a small screw from the music system on the shelf, something he must have left behind. I held it in my hand and smiled softly. It wasn't a painful reminder anymore, it was just a memory of a short story that had run its course. People come and go, but the lessons they leave behind help us grow. As the sun set, I sat by the same window where we used to talk. The view was the same, soft light, moving clouds, a calm breeze, but this time, my heart felt different. I wasn't angry or sad, I was grateful. Grateful that I had learned to trust again, even if it ended differently than I hoped. I whispered to myself, maybe he came to test my thing, but in the end, life tested my heart. And this time, I passed. The words felt freeing. I smiled, turned up the volume on the music system, and let the melody fill the room once more. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about healing, peace, and the quiet strength that grows after every storm. And just like that, the story that began with a simple visit ended with a lesson I would never forget, that sometimes, losing someone's presence is the first step toward finding your own peace.